Have you ever felt like the stress you're carrying is starting to show up in your relationships and not in a good way? Short with people, keeping everyone at arm's length, wanting connection, but just not being able to let anyone in? If that sounds familiar, you're in the right place. Welcome back to the Higher Alignment Podcast. I'm Minty Lamb, and this is part 2 of the High Performer Mini Reset series, where we're breaking down exactly how burnout shows up in every area of your life and what to do about it. Last week, we talked about food and my relationship with it. Today, we're getting into relationships. And honestly, this one hit the hardest. I'm sharing what my relationships really looked like when I was burning out at work, in dating, and even with my mom. By the end of this episode, you'll see that the way you're showing up with people isn't a character flaw, it's a stress response, and that changes everything. So let's get into it. All right, guys, we are diving into topic number 2 of the High Performer Mini Reset series that I'm doing for you guys, which is all about relationships. And if you guys aren't aware, part 1 or topic 1 I did last week about my relationship with food and how that's changed from before when I was burnt out and really just had no concept of stress management or working with my nervous system to how that's changed now. Now that that's like literally the way I live my life is through my nervous system and managing my stress properly. So if you haven't had a chance, go back and listen to that. But today we're going to dive into relationships, which is always a passionate subject for me because this is where I really felt it the most. I felt it in my body and in my relationship with food, which I talked about last week. But this is one that I think really drove home how much I was struggling. So, of course, you guys might know how this series goes by now. I do a before and after. So today we're going to talk about what life looked like before when I was burning out, when I had no concept of how to process stress or even that I had to do it. Like I thought it was just like you just deal with stress and it is what it is, but there's quite literally a system in your body that processes it. And if you are someone who is quite stress resilient, which I was, which means you can deal with a high level stress, that's great. But also what happens is your body needs to be able to process that and release that. Otherwise, you keep taking on the stress, and you deal with it. However, you eventually feel like you're drowning, like your head's underwater, and pretty soon things that you used to be able to deal with very easily all of a sudden feel very difficult. You become very reactive, very short-tempered, very impatient, requiring so much more energy out of yourself to figure out something that used to maybe only take 10% of your energy and is now taking 20%. This is what happens when you don't have the proper tools and strategy and system and awareness to manage stress, okay? So I actually did a post this week and it was talking about being called the office bitch. Or just how, I used to be interpreted as mean, and it's hard for me to say that because like, I'm sure like most of you, I am a good person. I have a good heart and all I've ever cared about is doing a good job. You know what I mean? And making other people happy and, being a contributor to the team. But, how that was, what I was feeling was not necessarily what was being portrayed or projected or even received by other people. And so the first part of this relationship piece was, at work, for those of you who don't know, I worked for Mercedes-Benz for 9 years. I worked in an auto dealer, like in a dealership. And if anyone knows that world, it's 98% men. I was part of a sales team and a management team. And when there was only 2 women, I was one of the 2. And so that is an industry where it is very easy as a woman to get heavily in your masculine. It's also very competitive. It is built on survival. Like there's no room for any of the things I talk about now as far as like leading with capacity or leading from a place of abundance. It's very much put your foot on their neck and step on it till you get the results. Like that's just the reality of what it is. But nonetheless, I still have to take responsibility for my patterns when I was there. And when it comes to relationships, I had become, while I was very good at my job, I had become very ruthless in that store. I was someone that all the guys knew they could come to make things happen, to pull things over the line. I would have, I was really good at my job, but the aura around my office and me was like, don't, like, come correct or don't come at all. Like, I had zero tolerance for bullshit. I had zero tolerance for stupid mistakes. I was not warm and friendly. Like, like I was just cold. I was very cold. And, it would look like the guys would come to ask me a question in my office and they'd knock on the glass, and you could tell they were tiptoeing just to kind of see what kind of mood I was in, right? Like, hey, Mintu. And sometimes they would just get a look and it'd be like, yeah. Like, it wouldn't have been like a hey, Mark, it'd be like, what's up? You know what I mean? Like, so so standoffish. You know what I mean? And of course, that's not welcoming to them at all. It would also look like, my one boss used to make fun of me because, like, I was there for 9 years, so these guys were like my family. Honestly, a lot of them. There's a lot of high turnover in that industry too, but I spent more time with these guys than I did any of my friends or my family. And so, we'd have a great month, or someone would have a birthday or something, and you naturally give a hug. Humans hug, it's connection. I remember my boss at the time, I would hug and he's like, what's with these hugs? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, it's so cold and frail. And he's like, it's awkward. He's like, you're so awkward when you hug. And I was like, what? Like, what are you talking about? He's like, you're awkward. Like, you're an awkward hugger. And, from their side of things, I could imagine as well too that they were like, there's only me and one other woman working there, and my other female counterpart was Faye, bless her heart, and she's a very sweet lady from New Zealand, and just like kind of like everybody's mom. So, they when they go to Faye, they know they can get some nurturing. So I think they were hoping from like, I'm kind of like their sister, they could get a little bit of that. But no, I was this awkward hugger. Like, I didn't know how to relate on that level with them, And the other big thing I remember is that, especially when I was at the peak of my burnout, not only was I cold and not warm, not welcoming, short fused, I was gossiping a lot. And you guys may have heard me talk about this in other episodes before, because this is a really big thing that stood out to me. But first off, I'm going to say people talk. You know what I mean? That's just part of life. Like, gossip, to a degree, is part of life. That's how you relate. That's how you connect. But I was doing it to a point where it was unhealthy. And I remember I had a coworker. He's my direct counterpart. We'll call him Luke. That's just coming to mind. And Luke and I were interchangeable. Okay. So because we were open 12 hours a day, obviously I was working 12 hours a day a lot of time, but I wasn't mandatorily on shift for 12 hours. So when I was there, I covered our section of work. When I was gone, he covered it. So we were interchangeable. And there was a time where Luke was going through some really hard things at home and his work was slipping. Okay. And so what happened was, instead of talking to Luke about it, I had created this story in my head about how he couldn't handle if I told him what he was doing wrong. So I just started cleaning up all of his mess. Okay. And it was substantial, if I'm being honest. And in the position we were in, we could not afford to make mistakes. We were dealing with hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars a month. That was up to us to process and make sure got, all the T's crossed and I's dotted. So it's a very attention to detail position. And the mistakes had been pretty substantial. And again, because I knew he was going through all these hard things at home, and again, I do have a heart, you know what I mean? I empathized with how hard it was. But instead of talking to him about what was going on, I just took on all the mistakes myself. I started covering for all his work. And then because I didn't talk to him about it, and because I didn't know how to process my stress or deal with that in a healthy way, what did I start to do? I started to gossip. And not in a way, again, where it's like, oh, did you hear Sally bought this or, whatever, like basic gossip. I would go complain to all the people around him and around me that were in our management group, with the exception of my boss, and I would bitch about him. And I would say, he missed this, he did that, he did it. Like it was gossip in a way that was very unproductive, immature, if I'm being honest, and just not helpful to the situation. Okay, if you're an executive who's craving more clarity, happiness, and a sense of real inner peace in your day-to-day, make sure you hit follow so you never miss an episode. This show is here to help you lead, succeed, and actually feel good while doing it. And if something resonates today, give it a like and share it with someone else who could use a little bit more calm in their life too. Because I was so overwhelmed, I didn't have a better strategy. And the gossip kind of had turned into a way for me to connect with people because I didn't have the capacity to connect about the things that were like actually going on within me, like the fact that I felt overwhelmed, the fact that I wasn't sleeping at night, the fact that I felt disconnected from my life and like was really questioning what I was doing, even though I had done everything everyone told me to work so hard to achieve all this. Like I was questioning these things. You know what I mean? So while there's way deeper underlying issues within me, I just made this issue with Luke the main focus. And now this is all the energy I'm spewing, And it had gotten to a point where it was just like, it was not kind. You know what I mean? And I wasn't attacking him as a person ever, but I was just constantly bitching about his work and I wasn't doing anything healthy to solve it. I just kept complaining and complaining and I was complaining to people around him. You know what I mean? And poor guy doesn't even know what's going on and here I am just venting and venting and like on one hand, you could look at it, it's like, well, Mintu, he wasn't taking care of his work. Like, it's understandable, but I could have handled that way better. But the reality is I didn't have the capacity, right? Like I was so overwhelmed with stress and not dealing with it properly that I couldn't even see clearly the damage I was doing, not even to our relationship and our team, but to me by gossiping to that level, And it was really uncomfortable and not my shining moment, if I'm being honest. But when I look back at it, like, could you have looked at me as like a bad person? Yeah, but the reality is I was capped. And when you get to that point where the pressure is built up so much that you don't even know what you need to do, but you just need to release. And it was like that was the only way during that time that I could figure out how to just let some of the pressure out of my head because there were so many other things going on. You know what I mean? So I was gossiping. And then the other part of it too, when it came to like relating to the people I work with, is I had very little sympathy for what people were dealing with outside of work. And it kind of ties into what I said with Luke. Like I did in my heart know, like he was going through some hard things with his family. So I did get it. But my response would always be, well, check that shit at the door. And in theory, like, yes. Do you mean at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, the office isn't necessarily the place to deal with all that. But the other side of it too is like when all you have is your job, and that's what it felt like at times I know the people that, to me, and I know to a lot of people that work there, when it feels like that's all you have, and that's where only place you're putting your energy, it is really hard to deal with your shit and not carry it to work, But I had no capacity to give anyone any empathy. And the ironic part is I was carrying my stress to work. You know what I mean? It maybe wasn't showing up as obviously as some other people, but the fact that I was super reactive, I had very low tolerance for people's mistakes. I couldn't hug, apparently. I was gossiping. Like, these were all signs that I wasn't doing a good job of keeping my stress or managing my stress and checking it at the door. Like, I was doing the same thing, just in a different capacity, right? So I just didn't have a lot of patience for people, and um it showed, because then what would happen is, like, so now, while I do a good job, people are a little scared to approach me. Um, they are then naturally a little nervous when they do approach me, because they're like, "Oh God, what kind of response am I gonna get out of Mintu?" You know? I was in a leadership management position, so then from that side of things, they're not getting maybe the nurturing and support that they need from me, you know what I mean, to make sure they can do their job well. And then while I do think I would cover it up a lot better with clients, I'm sure they felt it to some degree as well too, right? Because, you know, when you're at that point where your capacity is so shot, what I really relied on at that time was just making sure my work was pristine, and everything had to follow a very strict system. But it's like, if one thing fell out of line, or if I missed something, or if one of my support staff missed something that I need to do to execute, it would bother me so much more. Like, it end up in a, like, a "Oh, fuck," and like a groan and a grunt and a loud sigh and a swear, and, like, yeah, these are normal parts of being human. I'm not saying that you can't have those moments, but when that's consistently happening, it's like, okay, you know what I mean? That's when people start to, like, again, feel tense around you and not feel relaxed around you. And again, while I think I was doing a better job of masking that around my clients, maybe they didn't feel it as much. Um, because I had to, let's say, hide it from them more, or be on even more around them to mask this exhaustion and overwhelm I was going through, all that did was burn me out even more, because I felt like I had no outlet to just be me to anybody. I had to constantly be on. And so then that's when you're operating from that state, you can only get to a certain level of trust and a certain level of connection, because that mask you're wearing, essentially, which is coming from a good place, it's um creating a barrier to real truth and real connection, you know? So people would get to know a side of Mintu, but they wouldn't be able to get to know the real me. And I'm sure you could listen to this and argue, it's like, well, why do people at work need to get to know the real you? Well, I'm not saying you have to tell them your entire life story, but that's the only way real, genuine connection gets built, and genuine trust. And, that the most high performing teams in the world, Navy SEALs, like high producing companies, like, the thing that they have going for them is trust. There's actual trust amongst their team. There's actual trust built with the clients. And so, did I do a good job? Yeah. Was I doing a great job? No. Because again, I wasn't letting people in. I didn't have the capacity to let people in, because I just felt so disconnected from myself and what was important to me. And so yeah, it kept my work relationships kind of just always at bay, and some people might look at that as strategy. Like, like, I'm having these conversations daily. It's like, you don't want to let people in too close. But I think there's also context there, as far as, like, if you're always keeping people at bay, again, you can't ever invite in true, genuine connection. And letting people in doesn't mean that you, like, again, it spill every little detail about your life. It just lets them know that whatever you're dealing with together, whatever things you're working on together, you're going to give them the most authentic version of you in that moment. One of the biggest struggles for high achievers is they can't tell whether they're burnt out or just overly tired. That's why I created the High Performer Stress Assessment, which will assess exactly what your mind and body are struggling with and what you need to start feeling more balanced, grounded, and happy ASAP. It only takes 2 minutes to complete, and you can find the link in the show notes below. And I'm just gonna be honest, corporate's a hard place to do that. Corporate is built on masks. Do you know what I mean? And so it's not that it's impossible, but what it takes is you have to want to go beyond the general corporate rules of this is like, all the basic things you see on LinkedIn about just like, this is how you be a good leader and this is toxic leadership and blah, 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 blah. Like it's all very surface level stuff. It's valid points, but it only lets you in so deep to be a leader, where the best leaders are the ones who are authentically themselves and let that be seen. But that's what builds trust in people, because they trust the person next to them because they see the real human, right? So what I will say is my behavior. Oh, the other thing I actually will say though too is what's interesting about that period in my life is while I was really cold and hard at work, I was also doing a lot of extracurricular things with the people I worked with at that time. So we were, going for after work drinks. We were going for after work appies. We were, doing extracurricular things because those guys were like my brothers, really. So I would spend a lot of time with them, and I was single-eyed and I don't have kids, so it was kind of like, all right, I'm hanging with the homies every weekend, or whatever the case is, because you have common interests. So it was like when we did that, there was a level of connection there. But when it came to being at work, it was like, again, I was like the office bitch. Like I just it was just really hard for me to connect with people on a deep level, and again, everyone knew I had a good heart and that I meant well. So like, it's not like people like wanted me fired or didn't want me working there. But in comparison to how I am now, like it was a very cold, dysregulated version of myself that really made it hard to kind of break through in some areas. And it exhausted me more than anything, because it's exhausting to not be able to be yourself. It's exhausting to not be able to let people in, and walk around with this protective armor on all the time. And that was really challenging. Now, on the personal side of things, how my relationships were at that time, uh, you know, I'll talk about dating specifically, is if you've been following my podcast, you may have heard me say this before, but I used to say, I am constantly in a dick swinging contest and I'm winning most of them. That's how I felt as a woman, okay? So the males who are listening to this, you might not relate to this, but I was so heavily in my masculine, because the nature of what I did for work and the industry I was in. But, masculine energies are very protective, very safeguarding, very outwardly, and the making things happen. And so because I was in that space all day, I didn't know how to really soften at all. And again, because I was dysregulated and burnt out, it's like I just stayed in protection mode all day long, which was my masculine. So whether that be with the guys I worked with or guys I was trying to date, I was constantly competing on the most basic level. At work, naturally competing business-wise for numbers, for deals closed, for, whatever the case is, like naturally competing in that space. But even when it came to dating, I would be going on a date and I would lead with this competitive energy. And I wouldn't say this, but I'd be like, well, what does he make? What does he drive? What does he do for vacation? Where does he live? What's his house look like? Like all these subtle things, I'd be like, kind of like, well, what are you bringing to the table? Right? Because this is what I'm bringing to the table. And you could imagine how, at least for the type of man that I wanted to attract, how off-putting that would be, right? Because I'm a big believer in feminine and masculine energies. And for the record, we all have both. I have feminine and masculine energies. Men have feminine and masculine energies, but you have a more inherent nature. My inherent nature is female. For, a lot of men, their inherent nature is masculine, is the leadership, right? So you have access to both. But because I was so burnt out and so disconnected from myself internally, I was always in my masculine, right? So then I'm bringing that to the table with these guys I'm dating. And of course, they're like, it seems cool at first, but then it actually ends up repelling, because it's like, oh, this is not cohesive. This is not a harmony, right? So I was actually just talking with a client about this the other day. Like, my girlfriends, one particular, it just comes to mind. My girlfriend Vicky would be like, "Min, you're so intimidating. You're so intimidating." I'd be like, "Fuck, I'm so sick of hearing that. Like, I'm so sick of hearing that I'm intimidating." And I would hear that both at the office and in my dating life, right? And it's like, my previous response used to be well, if I'm intimidating, then they need to step it up. Like, it's not my fault they're insecure. And it's like, okay, to some degree, that's it. But the reality is, it's like, is that the energy I want to bring to people? And it's not that I have to dim my light to not be intimidating. It's not that, but it's just like there's something repelling here, you know? But again, because I was so dysregulated, like, relationships were so hard for me. It was like I was often caught up in relationships. Again, I'm talking about personally mainly, that fed to the dysregulated side of me. Like, they didn't feed to the regulated part of me, which would be the soft, nurturing, um, slower version of me. They would feed the gotta stay on the go, gotta always be proving myself, gotta always be showing people up, gotta always like be competitive and be on the ball. It would appeal to that. And you can imagine that when you're operating from that state and you're attracting that type of relationships, well, the longevity of that's probably not very strong. Right? Like, it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable, that pace in a career. It's not sustainable, that pace in a relationship, right? So then I would date guys that looked great on the outside, but they'd be so short-lived, and there wouldn't ever be an opportunity to really get deep with the relationship. And when I mean deep, I mean, like, I can only probably understand what that means now, but like, I was still performing. I still had a mask on. I was still proving my worth. I was bending over backwards to make things happen. I was people pleasing. I was not setting boundaries. I was just constantly self-abandoning to make things work. And again, I did that at work and I did that in my relationships. So it's just like none of my relationships really felt solid. A lot of them felt rather transactional. I will say that's with the exception of my family, meaning like my parents and my siblings and my core group of girlfriends. Like, they've always been solid, and I'm 10 years deep with all of my girlfriends. And then, obviously my family as well too. So I'm not referring to those relationships per se, but any relationships that were actively in development, I guess. So again, work relationships and people I was dating. It's just, it could never get any deeper because I didn't have the capacity to go deep within myself. It was just like, you guys know the feeling when it's just like there's just like things running all over your brain constantly. And when you think about depth and you think about trust and you think about authenticity, it requires a settling in, a settling of the mind, a settling of the energy so you can actually get into your heart, right? Like, just even close your eyes and breathe into that for a minute, right? Like, the difference between energy stuck in your brain, taking a deep breath, settling into your body. It's completely different, right? But because I, again, didn't know how to process my stress, didn't even know what my nervous system was at the time, everything just stayed so, what's the right word? It was just like things constantly running in my brain all day long. And I didn't know how to process that and bring that down in the body and then release it. And so then all my relationships stayed up surface level too, right? And couldn't get deep, right? But then again, when you can't get deep, there's a lack of trust. There's a lack of truth. There's a lack of real, genuine, deep connection, And then what happens is you keep trying to show up in these relationships and you exhaust yourself even more because it's fucking exhausting to stay surface level. If you're a high achiever, you probably feel the exhaustion that comes with always pushing and carrying the load. And here's the honest truth. Burnout doesn't fix itself by working harder or pushing more. You're not meant to just survive your success. You're someone who leads with impact and depth and intention, and you deserve to feel calm and connected while doing it. So imagine showing up present for your work and your personal relationships, feeling calm and grounded instead of constantly stretched. If that's what you want, this is exactly what we do in the Higher Alignment program. Book your assessment call through the link in the show notes, and let's get you back to balance and back to feeling like yourself again. Again, analogy, think about you're treading water on the surface all day long, treading water, versus just being able to relax and just like drop into the water and feel the water hold you and feel the buoyancy keep you up and allow your head to be consumed. Like I'm a water girl, so I don't, if you're not a water person, this might not resonate, but like, I know even something as simple as like when I lay in the bathtub and I let my head fully like submerge, and you have that, um, that the noise quiets and the water kind of like protects your head and your ears, and it's just things have just gotten a little bit quieter, and your senses have gotten a little bit more isolated. Like that's the difference. Right? When you stop treading water on the surface all day and you can finally release and drop and just sink into the ocean, it's a different level of depth, right? But I didn't for the life of me know how to access that at that time. And because of that, again, I had a lot of surface level relationships. I felt very drained interacting with people. I felt like I always had to be on. I felt like I could never really connect, and that ended up being more draining. And so, you know, it was honestly what led me to this work, and we're going to get into it, was my relationships, mainly my personal ones, like my dating life, that led me into this work. And first it kind of led me into doing more spiritual stuff and kind of figuring out like what's this pattern I keep repeating? Is this from a past life? Is this, some type of contract, my soul sign, like kind of exploring it from that end, which was helpful. But then I had to realize then I had to do the work of rooting in those more, let's say, spiritual lessons into the body and into being a human, and what that means on a practical day-to-day, how I adjust that on a practical day-to-day scenario, right? Like, how do I actually make adjustments to get beyond this? Because this is exhausting. And if you have ever been burnt out, or if you've ever felt really dysregulated, which you probably have if you're listening to my podcast, you know how isolating that can feel. And what you actually usually want more than anything is some connection and some support, and someone to say, I got this, I got you, I'm here for you. But because you're so dysregulated, you don't even have capacity to let that in. So, I remember even just like with my mom would want to call and check on me, and I wouldn't even have the capacity to talk to her on the phone. I'd keep it so short and so quick. And I remember she eventually got to a point where she's like, Minty, you don't make time for me. She's like, you cut me off every time on the phone, and I'm busy, I gotta do this. And it's like, when she'd call, I'd want to talk to her, so I would pick it up. But within 30 seconds, I'd be dysregulated. And like, hey, mom, I gotta go, work. And then my sweet mom's like, okay, she's gotta work, she's gotta go. But then that happened every time she called me. And she's like, Minty, you don't make time for me. You're always cutting me off. You're always busy, And I felt guilty that she said that, because a lot of times I just didn't have the capacity to be on the phone. So I'd get off with her and I'd just be laying on the couch, right? But I'm so in fight or flight that I can't hold space for anybody else. And when she had told me that, I remember feeling terrible and guilty because I love my mom. And I know there's not another human on this planet that loves me more than her, but I couldn't do it. It was just like I'd want to, and just my body would just be screaming, like, get off, get off, get off. We can't do it. We can't even handle our own stress, let alone anybody else's. And honestly, her conversations wouldn't even be stressful. It's not like she'd be calling to dump on me. She would just be calling to connect, and I didn't have the capacity to connect, which again is so It's so hard to be in that space because what you usually want more than anything is someone to help you, someone to see you, someone to listen to you, someone to just like be like, I got you, I get it, I'm gonna hold you. And the one person that could actually do that for me always, I didn't even have the capacity to let her in. 30 seconds into a phone call, I'm telling her I'm busy and I'm getting off the call, right? And this is what's so confusing about when you're burnt out, is because you start to like I really felt just so disconnected from myself. Like, who am I? I don't feel like Mintu. This is not who I am. I love my mother. I love working with people. I love connecting with people. I love being warm and nurturing, but none of that is showing up in the world right now. I am not showing up that way in the world right now, and I don't know how to get past this. It's you don't feel like yourself. You feel like, is something wrong with you? You wonder if you'll ever get back to a place of feeling content or happy, or if this is just the way things are gonna be forever. Like, you can feel so helpless and isolated. And again, but then when you feel helpless or isolated, then the other part of your brain goes, well, you should just feel grateful because you have this job and you make this money and you drive this car and most people would kill for your life. So just be grateful. But then you're like, okay, but I genuinely don't feel that way. So like, what's wrong with me? Am I selfish? Am I ungrateful? Am I just negative? Like, what's wrong with me? You know? And that just further like perpetuates the cycle of burnout, right? So if you have ever felt a lot of these ways, you're super reactive, you're short-tempered, you can't hold space for the people you love, you can't be present with the people you love, you want help, but anytime connection or help or even a compliment is offered to you, you like somehow dodge it or bypass it. You feel like you're on all day and wearing a mask. You have now become maybe the hard person to work with or the tough ass or the office bitch. Um, you can't hold space for the people you love like you used to. I don't know if I said that or not. You're gossiping more. You are having a hard time dating or connecting with people. You feel like an outsider in your own world. These aren't obvious signs of burnout, but they are, because the root cause of burnout is disconnect within. Burnout is not because you have too much on your plate. It's because something is misaligned and disconnected within with how you're showing up in the world and how you're showing up at work. And when you are in a high performing position, if you are in a management role, if you're in high level sales, if you're running a company, the level of pressure amplifies. So you cannot quite literally afford not to have the right strategy to process these things. I always say, if you start to ignore your needs and self-abandon for the sake of productivity, you will pay for this in your relationships, your health, and your happiness. It is inevitable. Okay? So if you could relate to anything I said today, I hope you just know that this is like a normal byproduct of not knowing how to manage stress. One of my pet peeves is when people talk about toxic leadership, because I think toxic leadership comes from an angle of just like, you're a bad leader and this is a bad environment. But what I see with toxic leadership is just a lot of dysregulated leaders, a lot of dysregulated executives who are well-intentioned, who have good hearts, who want people to succeed, but they don't know how to process their own stress effectively. And therefore it bleeds out onto the team, not because they're intending it to, just because they weren't given the skills or the tools to how to do that. None of us were. I had to go seek out this information myself. It's out there, but like, this is not talked about. This is not promoted. I had to figure it out for myself, right? And now I'm transferring that information to other executives, but it's not because you're bad or you should have known better. Just no one taught you this. No one's taught us about capacity. No one's taught us about the nervous system to the point of where it's a strategic business tool and a tool for life, right? The the degree of how much money you can make, how good your relationships are, the amount of love you can let in, the health in your body all depends on your nervous system. And if you're never taught how to work with that, chances are you're actually working against it. So again, if you saw yourself or you heard yourself in this episode today, I just want to let you know that this is a normal byproduct of feeling disconnected inside. And the good news is there's a solution for this. Okay? There's a solution and it's not hard. It just takes consistency and the right strategy, and you can come out on the other side of this a lot better. And not just better, happier, more content, more fulfilled, more loved, more confident, more excited about life again, more energized. Okay? So we're going to cover that in next week's episode, which is part 2 of the relationship component of the High Performer Reset series. I'll see you in that episode so you can find out how we get to that point and what's on the other side of feeling more regulated and being able to manage, process, and handle your stress better.